Hello there, Year 5. It's that time again. We're going to be doing some more reading of our story. Now, last time, a few weeks ago, we read two shorter chapters, chapter 23 and 24. And as a quick recap of what happened there, so Eric had set off, having read the letter. George had realised what was going to happen, the problem that it might be a trap, and so he'd set off to try and rescue Eric and to tell him about what was happening. So he'd put on the spacesuit, he'd been more careful to avoid any of the problems that he'd had when he went into space with Annie before, and he managed to find Eric, and he explained to Eric how Dr. Reaper was now involved in the story, and we also found out about the relationship between Eric and Dr. Reaper, and as lots of us had suspected, they used to work together as scientists, and then there'd been a falling out, as it were, and Dr. Reaper had been removed from the order and had been doing his own thing, and they hadn't really seen anything of him for a while. And then, right at the end of chapter 24, we started to get the impression that something was going terribly wrong, and Eric realised there was going to be a real problem, and they started trying to plan what was going to go on there. And right at the last second, he managed to push George back through the portal, and as he was going, shouted at him to find his latest book about black holes, which is leading us to believe that Eric might possibly have been travelling into a black hole out in space. So we'll pick it up now and we'll see what happens next. So chapter 25. George fell back through the door and he landed on the floor with a heavy thump. This time, the journey back from outer space to Eric's library had seemed to suck all the breath out of him. He had to lie on the floor for a few seconds, panting before he could then get up. When he staggered up to his feet, he hoped he would see Eric hurtling through the doorway. But instead, all he saw was the outline of the door, which had become faint and wavy. It seemed to be fading into nothing. He yelled out, "Eric!" But he got no reply, and then a millisecond later, the door vanished entirely. "Cosmos!" shouted George, undoing his glass space helmet. "Quick, Cosmos, we've got to get..." But as he turned around to face the great computer, he had his second great shock. Where Cosmos should have been, there was just a spaghetti tangle of coloured wires and an empty space. Looking wildly around the room, George saw that the library door was ajar. He ran through it into the hallway to find the front door wide open and the cold night air blowing in. With no time to take off his spacesuit, he dashed into the street, where he could make out the shapes of four boys running along the road. One of them was carrying a bulky rucksack with a few wires sticking out the top of it. George hurried after them as fast as he could in his heavy suit, and as he stumbled along, familiar voices drifted back to him on the wind. "Oi! Careful with that!" George heard Ringo shout. "Beep beep," came a noise from the rucksack. "Unlawful action. Unauthorised command." "Oh, when's it gonna shut up?" shouted Tank, who was carrying the rucksack. "How come it can speak when it isn't even plugged in?" "Help! Help!" came the mechanical voice from the rucksack. "I am being kidnapped. I'm the world's most amazing computer. You cannot do this to me. Alarm! Alarm!" "Oh, it'll run out of batteries soon," said Whippet. "Unhand me, you villain," said the voice inside the rucksack. "This bouncing around is bad for my circuits." "I'm not carrying it any further," said Tank, coming to a sudden halt. George immediately stopped in his tracks. "Someone else can take over," he heard Tank say. "All right," said Ringo in a menacing voice. "Give it here. Right. Now, little computer, you will shut up for the rest of the journey, or I will take you to pieces bit by bit until you're just a big pile of microchips." "Eee," said the computer. "Do you understand?" said Ringo in fierce tones. "Of course I understand," said the computer snootily. "I am Cosmos, the world's most amazing computer. I am programmed to understand concepts so complex that your brain would explode if you were even to..." "I said," snarled Ringo, opening the top of the rucksack and speaking down into it, "shut up. Which bit of those two words don't you get, you moron?" "I am a peaceful computer," replied Cosmos in a small voice. "I am not used to threats or violence." "Then be quiet," replied Ringo, "and we won't threaten you."
"Where are you taking me?" whispered Cosmos.
"To your new home," said Ringo, shouldering the rucksack. "Come on, gang, let's get there." And the boys set off at a run once more. George staggered after them as fast as he could, but he was unable to keep up. After a few more minutes, he lost them in the foggy, dark night. There was no point in running any further. He couldn't tell which way they'd gone. But even so, he felt sure he knew who had asked Ringo and his friends to break in and steal Cosmos. And knowing that was the first step to finding the supercomputer again. As Ringo and the boys ran off into the night, George turned and he walked back to Eric's house, where the front door was still wide open. He went in and he headed straight for Eric's library. Eric had told him to look for the book. But
Which book?
the library was full of books. They stretched from floor to ceiling on all of these shelves. George picked out a large, heavy tome and he looked at the cover. "Euclidean Quantum Gravity," it said on the front. He flicked through the pages and he tried to read a little. "Because the retracted time coordinate goes to infinity on the event horizon, the surfaces of constant phase of the solution will pile up near the event horizon." Oh, this was hopeless. He had no idea what any of it meant. So he tried another book, this one called Unified String Theories. He read a line from it. "The equation for a conformal..." Oh, no. His brain hurt as he tried to make out what any of it meant. In the end, he decided it meant he hadn't yet found the right book. He carried on looking around the library. "Find the new book," Eric had said. Find the new book. George stood in the middle of the library and he thought very hard. With no Cosmos, no Eric, and no Annie, it suddenly seemed terribly empty in the house. The only link George had to them now was a pink spacesuit, some tangled wires, and these huge piles of science books. Suddenly he missed them all so terribly that he felt a sort of pain in his heart. He realised that if he didn't do something, he might never see any of them again. Cosmos had been stolen, Eric was fighting with a black hole, and Annie would certainly never want to speak to him again if she thought that George had anything to do with her dad getting lost forever in outer space. Oh, he had to think of something. He concentrated very hard. He thought of Eric and tried to imagine him with his new book in his hand, to picture the front cover so that he could remember what the book had been called. Where would he have put it? And then suddenly George knew. He ran into the kitchen and he looked next to the teapot. Sure enough, there, covered in tea stains and rings, where hot mugs had been rested on top of it, was a brand new book called Black Holes, which George realised was actually written by Eric himself. There was a sticker on it which read, in what he thought must have been Annie's handwriting, "Freddie the Pig's favourite book," with a little cartoon drawing of Freddie next to the words. That's it, thought George. This must be the new book Eric was so happy to find when Freddie stormed through the house. This must be the one. There was just one more thing he needed from Eric's house. It was another book, a large one with lots and lots of pages. He grabbed it from beside the telephone, took off Annie's pink spacesuit, and shoving the two books into his school bag, he rushed back to his own house, closing Eric's front door carefully behind him as he went. Now that evening, George scoffed his supper down very quickly, and then he shot upstairs to his room, claiming he had lots of homework to do. First of all, he got the very big book out. On the front it said, "Telephone Directory." Now, as his parents didn't have a phone, George had thought it was unlikely they would have the phone book, which was why he'd borrowed Eric's. He searched through the alphabetical lists under the letter R, and using his finger to go down the long column of names, he came to Reaper, Dr. G, 42 Forest Way. Now George knew Forest Way. It was the road that led out of town to the woods where his parents took him in autumn to gather mushrooms and blackberries. He figured he couldn't go there tonight. It was too late and his parents would never let him out at this time. And anyway, he still had work to do with the Black Holes book. But first thing in the morning, though, he'd go to Dr. Reaper's house on his way to school. and by then he hoped that he'd have a plan. He put down the phone book and he got Eric's Black Holes book out of his bag, desperately hoping it would hold the information he needed to rescue Eric. Every time he thought about Eric, which was about once every 3 minutes, it felt awful.
He imagined him alone,
Frightened in outer space, not knowing how to get back, with a black hole trying to drag him into its dark belly. George opened the book and he read the first sentence of page 1. "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars," he read. It was a quote from the famous Irish writer Oscar Wilde. George felt it was written specially for him. He was indeed in the gutter, and he knew for sure that some people were looking at the stars. So he kept on reading. But that first sentence was the only one that he understood. Next, he read, "In 1916, Karl Schwarzschild found the first ever analytic black hole solution to Einstein's equation." Oh, he groaned to himself. The book was in a foreign language again. Why had Eric told him to look for this book? He didn't understand it at all. And Eric had written it, yet every time Eric had told him about science, he'd made it sound so simple, so easy to understand.
George felt his eyes welling up.
He'd failed them, Cosmos, Annie and Eric. He lay down on his bed with the book in his hand as hot tears ran down his cheeks, and there was a tap at the door, and his mum came in. "Georgie," she said, you look very pale, love. Are you feeling ill?"
No, Mum, he said sadly.
"Just finding my homework really difficult." "Well, I'm not surprised." His mum had picked up the Black Holes book, which had fallen out of George's hand and onto the floor. She looked through it. "It's a very difficult textbook for professional researchers. Honestly, I'm going to write to the school and tell them this is ridiculous." But as she spoke, a few pages fluttered out from the back of the book. "Oh dear," said George's mum, collecting them up. "I'm dropping your notes." "They're not..." "Oh, mine," George was about to say when he stopped himself. At the top of one of the pages, George read, "My difficult book, made simple for Annie and George." "Thanks, Mum," he said quickly, grabbing the pages off her. "I think you've just found the bit I need. I'll be fine now."
You sure?" asked his mum, looking surprised.
"Yes, Mum," George nodded furiously. "Mum, you're an absolute star. Thanks."
"Oh, a star," said Mum, smiling.
"That's a nice thing to say, George." "No, really," said George earnestly, thinking of Eric telling him that they were all the children of stars. "You are."
"Well, don't you work too hard, my little
"Star," George's mum told him, kissing him on the forehead. George was smiling now, so she went off downstairs to put another batch of lentil cakes in the oven, feeling a lot happier about him. As soon as his mum had left the room, George jumped off his bed and he gathered together all the bits of paper that had fallen out of the back of the Black Holes book. They were covered in spidery handwriting and little doodles, and they were numbered pages 1 to 7. So he started to read.
And that is the end of chapter 25.
Questions will be coming up on the screen in a moment. Have your best go at them. As usual, watch the video back if you want. You could even look back at some of the other videos of chapters we've read whilst we've not been at school for extra ideas to help you. Obviously make notes as you go if you need to and see if you can answer those questions. And then we'll get on and pick it up again next week when we'll take a look at what was in those notes, those pages that Eric had written, and hopefully find out a bit more about our story. But in the meantime, have a go at those questions. Hope you've enjoyed listening to the chapter, and best of luck with all that. See you next time. Bye.